Just to introduce and hand it over to Rachel. So today's topic is Urban Tree Canopy Assessments. Our speaker today is Rachel Comte. She's with Urban Canopy Works. She is an arborist, urban planner, facilitator, and communication expert. She is a leading authority on urban forestry strategic planning and has developed master tree canopy plans for cities across the United States. Rachel is passionate about making cities better, healthier places for people to live, and a substantial, vibrant tree canopy is an essential part of this work. Prior to her urban forest management experience, Rachel served in diverse roles throughout her career. She has over 20 years of combined experience in project management, strategic marketing, consulting, landscape design, green infrastructure, and planning and urban forestry, and has worked in private, public, as well as nonprofit sectors. So she is our expert on urban canopy, and I'm going to hand it over to you, Rachel, and let you go.
Okay. Thanks, Leslie. Was excited to see so many of you sign up for this webinar expressing interest in canopy assessments, as I really believe they're a basis to so much work that is needed in communities of all sizes. I know based on what Leslie said, we have people from all different size communities. So my focus, as Leslie said, I'm a planner and an arborist, so my focus is on helping communities in all areas of urban forestry planning, whether it's master plans or canopy assessments or working with development code or tree code, public engagement, whatever it happens to be. One of the reactions I get when I tell people about this is they say, what? Is that even a thing? It is, especially today, now that we know and have technology to measure the services and values that trees provide in cities. It is an asset and should be managed on some level, and tree canopy is an important part of that. So are you seeing the next slide? Just want to make sure because it wasn't popping up. Leslie?
Yes, I see it.
Okay, great. I'll just keep going then. So first of all, we're going to talk about why measure tree canopy, but I want to clarify what I've learned in dealing with the public. And that may not be the case with this group on the call here, but we need to define what is tree canopy. We're not all operating from the same starting point. You picture yourself sitting under the shade of a tree. You're sitting under the tree canopy. So when it's seen from above, it's a circle of leaves and branches that cover the land. So the question that canopy assessments answer is how much of the land of a city is covered by trees. So we'll get into more of this in more detail in a minute. But as technology has progressed over the last decade or so, it's becoming easier for communities of all sizes to have one completed. So like I said, I'm glad that everyone's tuning in to learn more about this. So let's first talk about why canopy assessments are important, and then we're going to go into what is actually tangibly a UTC, Urban Tree Canopy Assessment, examples of how they're used, and then ways to get one for your community, and then we'll open it up for questions. So canopy cover, your canopy cover level is required and used to estimate benefits that trees provide in your community. You can see a list of the canopy services on the right there. I'm obviously not going to go through each one. We don't have time to do that, but a couple interesting statistics that I share with people. Well, of course, I think they're all interesting, but there is documentation now that kids living in areas with higher canopies suffer less from asthma. Canopied areas with lots of trees can be 25 degrees cooler at any given time in the summer. This is critical for residents that are both very young and very old, and also for those in low-income areas. The energy savings to a higher income area is just sort of a nice perk, but in a low-income area, it's critical. So canopy measurement is critical for measuring benefits. And one other benefit or statistic that I like to share with people is business districts with tree canopy are more successful. It's been shown that people shop longer and spend up to 11% more for the same products when they're in business districts with tree canopy. I always end up sharing that with people when they're saying, hey, those trees are covering up my business sign. I always share that statistic with them. Another reason it's valuable to measure canopy is urban growth. 55% of the world's population lives in urban areas right now. That's going to be, they're predicting that's going to be almost 70% by 2050. So with that urban growth comes stresses and challenges in urban areas. The challenge is to keep cities both solvent and livable. So trees and tree canopy do a lot to manage urban heat island effects, stormwater, public health. Cities are using trees to manage all sorts of environmental stewardship projects, and it all starts with canopy cover data. Measuring Canopy also identifies and clarifies where change is happening and why. It helps cities identify areas of the highest need, or that is there equal coverage? Are all residents getting benefits or access to those benefits that trees provide equally? I mentioned before a push to make and keep communities livable, both for current residents and to attract new residents, which is the focus of a lot of communities. And in the end, trees are city infrastructure, which means they're an asset, requires asset management. Asset management starts with the knowledge of what you have currently, and that's where tree canopy comes into play. Canopy data, like I said, is used to determine the quantified tree benefits. So once you get a tree canopy assessment, you can then enter this data into the suite of iTree tools, and you get actual numbers of what your tree canopy provides to your community. But there are also less quantitative benefits, more qualitative, like that statistic I mentioned about business districts. I mean, we know people spend more, but we can't put a dollar figure on that citywide. But is that any less important to the vitality of your business districts? I mean, think about it. Where would you rather shop? It's intuitive, and we can't put a number on it, but it's very important. So those are my thoughts on why canopy cover is important. And I'm going to show you some examples of how cities are using canopy assessments. But first, let's look more closely on what exactly a canopy assessment is. And let me preface this by saying that I am not an expert in the technology of canopy assessment and the methodology, but I represent someone probably like you, I'm guessing, that would be in a position to request and use this data to start maybe supporting or defending or starting efforts in your community to improve your urban forests. So I'm happy to take some technical questions at the end, but I often have to call experts and get those questions answered myself. So I'll do what I can to answer your questions. So what is a canopy assessment really? I mean, I use this acronym frequently, UTC, and I apologize for that because I'm always telling people, hey, don't use those acronyms. People don't know what that means. So when I say a UTC, we're talking about an Urban Tree Canopy Assessment. When I got into this world years ago, people were talking about this. It was sort of a new thing, and I kept asking, well, what exactly is this UTC? Tangibly, what is it? And nobody would answer me. They just, oh, it's a lot of broad concepts. How much canopy do you have? Blah, blah. I want to clarify this for you. It's getting a UTC is having or hiring someone to sit down at a computer, map out with aerial imagery, and calculate exactly how much of your community is covered by tree canopy or other land cover. And we're doing it in a type of software called GIS. Most cities these days have zoning data, parcel lines, streets, watersheds, et cetera, mapped out in a GIS system. Some of you are very clear on what GIS is. Some of you may not be. Smaller cities don't usually have their own GIS staff person, but often use someone at the county level. So GIS is used everywhere, I think, at this point. So what we're doing, when you have a full canopy assessment done, we are adding a land cover layer. So where every space on the map is one of 5 land cover classes. It's either tree canopy, which are the trees in the city, low vegetation, which is everything green that's not a tree. So think lawn, shrubs, fields, that kind of thing. Impervious surfaces, which is everything concrete, roads, buildings, whatever it happens to be, anything that rainwater is going to run off. Well, hard surfaces, let's say. The 4th one is open water, so that streams, oceans, ponds, lakes, that kind of thing. And then the last one is bare soil. You don't typically see a lot of this, but it's typically construction sites. So when you have a canopy assessment done, what you get is this land cover layer. That's one more layer for you to keep in your GIS system that you can then do lots of analysis on. And so this is what it ends up looking like. A map like this. And so the pink area in there is impervious, the dark green is tree canopy, the light green, low vegetation. You can see there's some bare soil in there. It looks like maybe they're building a road somewhere. And the open water, there's a river there. And then so you'll be able to look at, once you have one done, you'll be able to get that data for your city and say, all right, we've got 30% tree canopy, 20% impervious surfaces. So that is, all that data is expressed as a percentage. Note that this is not, a tree canopy assessment is not how many trees do we have. It quantifies the amount of tree canopy across all the land, both public and private, which when doing urban forestry planning in cities is really important to have, because the cities often, or many cities, have an inventory of the street trees and park trees and public trees, but really typically 80% of the tree canopy in cities is on private land. So it really is important to map out tree canopy, because then you're looking at both public and private land. So there's basically two parts to canopy assessment. One is building this land cover layer. And then the second one is analyzing the land cover layer in any way that you would like to do it. And the cost, that's a question we get, is how much does this cost? And it's so hard to get a number without talking to someone specifically about your community and what kind of analysis you want and how big is it. Do you just want the land cover layer and you're going to do your own analysis? Are you having them do the analysis? Or how many land cover classes do you want? Because some people divide impervious surfaces into multiple land cover classes, like roads, buildings, parking lots, whatever it happens to be. So there's a lot of variations on cost. I'll talk about that a little bit more, but I'm not sure I'm going to be able to answer your costs too much, because it really is so variable. So the next question that I get from people typically when we're talking about this is, hey, well, how much canopy should we have? Well, there's no magic number. This table of data, I don't know how much your screens are, how big your screens are where you're watching this, but this is just random cities and their tree canopy cover and the year their canopy was assessed, if they have a goal and what their population is, what their square miles are. You see American Forest came out a number of years ago with, hey, every city east of the Mississippi should probably shoot for overall 40% tree canopy. But they have since rescinded that, saying, these communities are just so different, you just can't put a number on it. Like, look at the bottom there, Las Vegas, 9% tree canopy. Well, if you think about it, if there was no city there, they wouldn't have any tree canopy. So are they really going to shoot for 40%? No. Tallahassee and Charlotte and Atlanta have high tree canopy covers. Cincinnati, where I am, and Pittsburgh. Cincinnati is actually not on. I thought they were on there, but they're not. 38% canopy in Cincinnati. Pittsburgh, 40% canopy. We have in these two cities a lot of undevelopable hillsides, which are canopied. So we're going to have more than someone like Cleveland. When we did the master plan for Cleveland, they have 19% canopy, but that's very flat. Everything's developable. They were a huge city at one time. They have shrunk over the last 50 years. So there is no magic number. But the important thing is that you know where you are and are able to identify, hey, are we losing canopy? Because that's going to be really important in the work that you decide to do in coming years. The other thing to keep in mind here when you're looking at this is this canopy cover, sometimes it's done by the county, so it's county-wide numbers. Louisville, for example, is a city-county merged government, so their canopy cover is, I think it's 37% right now, but that's a huge area because it's the entire county. But if you're looking at the urban core, it's probably down around 20%. So you got to make sure if you're comparing your canopy to someone else's that you're looking at apples to apples. So I'll show you a few examples of canopy, this land cover data use. because you have that layer of land cover data after you have a UGC analysis done, you can slice it, dice it any way you want by overlaying it with other segmentations. You can look at canopy by land use. So how much does the residential land use, how much canopy do they have versus commercial land use in your city, council districts or wards or whatever it happens to be in your community. You can look at census block data, which I'll show you in a minute, watersheds, anything you want. The possibilities are endless. You just overlay in GIS whatever segmentation you want, and then you can run the data again and get your land cover data for those new segmentations. If you're fortunate enough to have done a canopy assessment in past years, or you have the funds to do 2 years worth at one time, you can analyze change of, okay, we used to have 40% canopy in this one neighborhood, and now we have 30, and you can drill down and, hey, what's happening there? Why did we lose those? You can evaluate the effectiveness of your existing code. Is your development code doing what you want it to do? You can look at canopy before and after development. You can also do a ratio of tree canopy to impervious surfaces that really gives you, it's pretty accurate actually, it gives you hot spots, as far as urban heat island goes. These are the hottest areas because the ratio of canopy is, there's much less canopy and much higher impervious surfaces, which tends to be very hot. It's just a long list of things that you can do. So let's look at a couple of them. This one is Louisville, like I was talking about. Tree canopy here is mapped as a potential solution to urban heat island issues. In 2015, a Georgia Tech study came out that cited Louisville as one of the fastest growing heat islands in the country. Trees are one of the most impactful ways of mitigating heat island impact. And conversely, a loss is a cause of worsening heat island issues. And in response to this, Louisville, they decided they needed to see what was going on with their canopy. So they had 3 canopy assessments done at once, one for 2004, one for 2008, and one for 2012. And this map here shows the dark red shows where they saw the biggest losses in that period. And they were able to kind of project out, okay, if we're continuing this way, this is what our canopy is going to be in coming years. So they are using this to find where change is occurring and why, and then they're going to see if anything can be done about it. So they're knee deep in this right now. Another example of land cover changes over time. This chart, we also mapped population changes as well. So this is in Tallahassee. So this is looking at land cover data, but in more of a not a bar chart, can't remember what this chart is called. But you can see how the population in Tallahassee changed from in the 50s, it was down near 30,000, and now it's coming up on 200,000. And you can see how the canopy changed over time. Their canopy grew between 54 and 83, primarily because they were going from agricultural land use to residential land use. And so that's going from no canopy to trees that are planted around homes that are being built. So, but we didn't know that until we drilled down and looked at some of these areas specifically and what changes were being made. So it's interesting to learn about your history and the trends in your city or community. You can look at canopy by census tract. So these charts are often hard to read, so I'll clarify this for you, but we've got land cover data. And so we can look at canopy cover by census block. But those census blocks also have data attached to them that shows home ownership, population density, everything that you can find in census data, you can link to canopy. So we map them out in a scatter plot chart. So each of those blue points is a census block that's at, that has a canopy percentage attached to it. And then we map out the census data with it. So that map on the left-hand side, census block shows, let me back up, with the scatter plot chart, you can put in a calculated trend line, and that's what the yellow line is. So that's what we're paying attention to here, is the finding on that yellow line shows that census blocks with higher percentage of owner-occupied properties have higher canopy cover. On the right, it shows census blocks with higher population densities have lower canopy cover. Some of these findings are not a surprise, but others can be. And we often see lower income areas have less canopy. However, we found in Charlotte, actually, that income did not necessarily correlate to canopy cover. In fact, many low income areas had large tree cover from these large oaks planted a long time ago on private property. What we learned when we did some public meetings was that there wasn't a lot of funds. Those homeowners and renters didn't have a lot of funds to care for them, so it was more of a financial burden when other people in the city were saying, hey, we got to keep those, and they were saying, well, we don't have any money to maintain these. And so that's something that we uncovered in Charlotte, and that was one of the things we started to work on, options in that case. Cleveland used canopy data overlaid with other data to determine priority areas, where to focus on making improvements first. And so they created their own need equity index based on canopy cover, average value of benefits per acre, which that's that purple map up there on the right. I know it's sort of hard to see. Other census data like income, but they also tried to put in some public health data. And so trees planted and preservation work done over the next several decades, they determined they're going to start in the areas of highest need first. And so that all work is planned equitably based on this equity map. Effectiveness of code and regulations. Canopy data can be used to evaluate how effective your development code is. So we looked at canopy before and after a development was built. We looked on a number of different sites. This was also in Charlotte. Many development codes have an option to pay in lieu fees, and so the developer pays and then removes the trees and then replants whatever the equation is locally of how many trees you need to replant. Is that effective? What's the actual impact on canopy for these options? It varies by community, but what we took, you can see in this map, this is a canopy map before a development and during a development. So it started off 56% canopy on that specific lot. During development, went down to about 1%. They planted, let's see, what does it say on there? 428 trees as part of the development that went in after the development was done. We used iTree Eco Forecast tool to map out what the canopy cover is in those areas, what that will be, growth factor, in 30 years. And so this site, you know, if assuming those iTree models are accurate, which I think they are the best we can do at this point, I think they are fairly accurate, we're not even going to get to 4% on that lot. Is that effective? Is that what the community wants with that code? That has to be answered locally. That's not something that, you know, we were able to answer for them, but it gives them data to say, okay, that's really not what we want, or yes, this is fine. We're good with this. Let's keep this code the way it is. So we did that in a bunch of different development sites, so that can give you insight on effectiveness of regulations. So I could go on and on of different analyses you can run once you have a high resolution tree canopy assessment done, any segmentation. If you have a GIS staff person, or if you're hiring someone to load in boundary lines or any other data layer you want, you can run analysis on. So it's sort of, you can geek out to the data. Every community is different what they're looking for. But, you know, I want to get into how to get a canopy assessment done if you're thinking about it for your community. Let me see how I'm doing on time here. Okay. So option one, I sort of put these into 4 buckets. Technology is always changing, and so these options are always changing, but option one, see if one already exists. If you're a small community or a city, your county may already have one. I've run into this with a few communities saying, hey, we want this, and they didn't even know it was done, so they just talked to their county or their regional planning organization, whatever it happened to be, and got the data. So that sometimes seems like a no-brainer, but I always want to remind people, check and see if that data is out there. Option 2 is hiring a firm to do a high-resolution assessment. Option 3 is a DIY option using iTree, which I'll show you. And then option 4 is exploring partnership with a local university. So I'll talk about 2, 3, and 4 in a second, but I want to bring up a couple concepts that may seem a little bit technical, but I feel like you need to understand just the basic concept, because when you start talking to someone about having a canopy assessment done, they're going to be throwing around these terms, and I want to make sure if you do it, you get what you need out of these assessments. So one is image resolution. So take a look at this aerial imagery. I just took this from Google Maps, so you'll have to use your imagination a bit there and pretend the map on the left is low resolution and the map on the right is higher resolution. In a canopy assessment, aerial imagery has a resolution that basically divides imagery into grids. You can see the low resolution has higher grids, so that might be a 30-meter resolution, and the higher resolution might be down to 1 meter. But each grid is assigned one of those 5 land cover classes. So you can see when you actually put the land cover classes over this, and this is not, I just was putting colors in to show you the difference. You can see what turns out at the end. The lower resolution imagery shows 38% canopy, and higher resolution shows 35%. Low vegetation is a little bit different, impervious surface is different. And again, this is just an example. I wouldn't go in there and count the actual squares because I was just trying to demonstrate the concept. So if you're looking at something, you think, well, it's low resolution, but we're going to do it anyway. If in later years you run another canopy assessment and you use high resolution, you're basically not comparing apples to apples. So say you have 40% canopy right now that you determined using a low resolution imagery. If 10 years from now you used high resolution, it might show that you have 30% canopy. I mean, it wouldn't be that different, but you can't really tell how much you've gained and lost in that period because you're not really comparing apples to apples. So something to think about with this low resolution versus high resolution imagery. The second concept, let me get here, relates to just methodology of how it's done. UTCs, canopy assessments are that can be mapped through a point sampling method or created done by creating a full data layer in GIS, like I was talking about earlier. In a point sampling method, hundreds, thousands of points are looked at one by one, like that map on the left, and you're determining at each point, is that tree canopy, is it impervious surface, is it low vegetation, that kind of thing. And so it ends up to be a statistical sampling. And you end up with one set of data. You end up with, okay, our canopy is 25%, you end up with a percentage for each land class. But you can't do anything with it afterwards. You can't overlay land use and see what your canopy cover is by land use. You walk away from a point sampling with just one table with 5 percentage numbers in it. But it's a lot less expensive. So it's not that it's not a good thing to do. It's just point sampling. You can do a lot less with it than with on the right-hand side, there's a photo or a full UTC analysis, where you build a land cover layer. Every grid is assigned a class, and you can do whatever you want with it later, whatever analysis you want to do with it, like by neighborhood, watershed, business district. So the functionality is the issue here later on. The other thing that if you do a point sampling versus a full land cover layer is you might say you did point sampling and you looked at 2004 and 2012. So you did it's apples to apples because you use the same system. So say in 2004 you had 30% canopy, in 2012 you had 28% canopy. You are not able with that system to look at where the canopy has been lost and why. So with the one on the right, with a full UTC analysis, you can figure out not only have you lost canopy, but you can see where the loss is occurring and drill down to aerial imagery and figure out exactly why. So point sampling versus full land cover layer development, I just wanted to point out what those differences are. They all, the more points you do in an area, the higher the accuracy level. So it's not that one is more accurate than the other. It's just what you can do with it later. So we talked about option one, check and see if there's a canopy assessment that's already been done. Save yourself some grief. Option two is this full GIS land cover layer development. So this is an accurate canopy map. It takes greater processing time and technical skills are required, and so it's a higher cost. So you're hiring a firm that does this. They're using, GIS, which is what's used across the board, and the latest high-resolution aerial imagery available. You can hire them to do just the land cover layer and then all the analysis yourself if you have a GIS person on staff that wants to do it, or you can have them do the analysis as well. This is the most expensive option, but the most accurate and most useful, more importantly. You can parse out the data, like I said, any way you would like. And what you get in the end is the land cover layer that you house at wherever your other GIS data is housed, like at your county level, and you can then use it at any time. You can have a neighborhood say, hey, we want to know what our canopy is in our neighborhood, and you can produce maps off of that for them as well, which is actually very effective for public engagement, because if you want people to make changes in their community, they're more apt to make changes at their neighborhood level. So if you have a land cover layer in GIS, you can produce whatever maps you want later on. About cost, I want to go back to the cost question because I think people are going to have questions on that. How, potential, there's a lot of analysis that can be done afterwards, which I have mentioned. One additional analysis that you can have done is you can identify potential planting areas. So typically that is that low vegetation layer. But you go, because that's where potentially you could plant in a lawn or in a field, but you go and take out all the ball fields, all the agricultural fields. You have to do some work there, but that's, there's lots of different analyses you can do. As far as cost, I've sort of asked around. There's no per square mile cost that I could find. And I feel like I've done this enough that I should have a sense, but they're just so different. You can have someone do a tree canopy land cover layer only. So it's not 5 classes, it's just tree cover plus everything else. And that could be anywhere from 5,000 to 40,000, depends how big your community is. If you add more land classes, do more analysis, get multiple years done, which is really very valuable because it's nice. It's nice to see a point in time, like, all right, today we have this much canopy, but the change analysis is really where the activity is. And that's valuable to know. You really need to have a conversation with your GIS staff or your county and start to ask around and talk to these firms like Planet Geo, Davies, Save a Tree. There's a bunch of different ones that do it out there. We at Urban Canopy Works do canopy assessments for smaller communities because we can do the small ones. But if it's anything larger, then we would go to one of these firms as well and work with them. Here, option 3, the DIY options. So iTree tools. iTree is a suite of online tools related to urban forestry planning work. It's developed by the U.S. Forest Service. There are 2 tools in iTree Canopy that you can use. One is, or that iTree you can use. One is iTree Canopy and one is iTree Landscape. iTree Canopy is this point sampling method. It's free. You go in there and define an area. You sort of draw a polygon on a map of where your city is or where your neighborhood is, and it then walks you through, okay, what land cover classes do you want to define? And you just write, tree canopy, low vegetation, water, whatever it is you want to determine. And then it starts churning up random points, and you go through and just say, okay, this point, it shows you an aerial image on a map, and you say, that's canopy, that's low vegetation, that's impervious, whatever. And it just keeps walking you through it. And it's tedious. So hire an intern to do this kind of thing because, oh my gosh, you're talking about thousands of points to get anything accurate. I mean, it depends on how big your area is, but it's, the more points you have, the more accurate it is, and you'll get a snapshot of what your canopy is currently. So it's definitely an option. iTree Landscape, that's more like surf to the area on the map that they'll provide. And they've got low resolution imagery from 2011 to 2001. You choose a region, you can view existing land cover data, customize it and export it. At this point, 2011, that's almost 10 years ago. So I'm not sure how accurate this is, and the number of land cover classes they have a ton. So I find it a little bit overwhelming, but it's there, and it should be something that you look into. The last option is partner with a local university. There are universities that have urban planning degrees and environmental sciences and GIS degrees, and you may be able to get them to build you this land cover layer and do analysis. I mean, that's sort of hit or miss. Sometimes you'll get someone really good to do it, and sometimes it just becomes more work than you wanted. But it's definitely something to look into. If you have a GIS person in your county or your city who's interested in this, they may want to do it themselves. It really depends, but I think it's worth looking into who your local partners are. It's definitely an option to consider. And that is basically an overview of assessments, what they're used for, what's involved in getting one. I'm guessing many of you have questions. I've tried to keep this somewhat basic because I do think it's so valuable, and it's not as complicated as everyone makes it out to be. I'm happy to take your questions whenever you're ready.